Story 1. I once was a temporary worker at a small office on a construction site around 2003. I was only there for one day while the regular person was attending some training. They sat me down and told me that I just needed to copy all these numbers from one program to another. So I selected them, hit Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V. They stared at me. It turns out about 60% of this woman's time had been spent manually typing numbers from one place to another. Story 2. I work in finance at a large multinational corporation. I feel like a big part of our job is to just stop doing things and wait to see who complains. If someone complains, we keep doing it. If there is silence, then we call it a control drop and put it on our performance review for creating efficiencies. Story 3. I worked in a computer numerical control shop. There would be a pile of jobs that needed to be done for the month. Some took days to run while others were generally quick. The record for jobs done in one day was 8. What I did was look through all the jobs and organize them by setup. Every job has a setup time. It can take an hour to get all the tooling together, set up the cutting table, and set the part square to the table so the machine can determine where the part is. This ensures that when I insert the code into the machine, it can run flawlessly and drill, mill, and tap with precise measurement for every single job. The majority of parts use standard tooling, and I have automatic tool changing with 20 pockets. I figured out how to line up the jobs so they all have the same setup, breaking the record with 30 jobs done in one day. This saved the company tens of thousands in work hours, all because I didn't feel like doing all the setups that day. Story 4. I worked a summer at a mortgage company as an assistant to the underwriters. My only job was printing documents and then hole punching them to put in folders. They had a super fancy Xerox printer that basically did my entire job for me. But the underwriters at this company did not know how to click through printer settings to make the machine hole punch as it was being printed. I showed them how to do it, and they resisted it super hard, like they did not trust it. So I got to keep my job, but what was supposed to take me all day literally took me about 20 to 30 minutes first thing in the morning. So they started assigning me real tasks and even offered to keep me on to eventually become an underwriter too because I was so sharp, meaning I knew how to use the very expensive printer they already had. I was just about to start graduate school, so I had to politely decline, but I am pretty sure they did not hire someone to replace me when I left. Too long. Did not read. They had a printer that already did my job for me but did not know how to use it. I showed them. Story 5. Maybe not the most impressive story here, but I thought it was a great sidestep of effort nonetheless. A coworker of mine had to get rid of a smaller junk fiberglass boat with no trailer. Our other coworkers were all telling him how much time and money he would need to spend to get rid of it, and he just replied, "Oh, is that so?" He took off one day and sat down on his lawn with a cooler of beer. That day was garbage day. Inevitably, the trash guys rolled up. He handed each of them a cold beer and said, "Hey boys, got $50 for each of you if you help me out real quick." They fed the entire 12-foot boat into the packer, crushing 2 feet at a time. Story 6. I used to process health savings account claims around 10 years ago. One system we had to use back then was an old terminal program that took 4 line items per page. For a usual claim, it was manageable, not too hard to keep track of things over 2 or 3 pages for a longer claim, but most fit on one. However, we had the dreaded shoebox claims. This was when a person saved every receipt all year in a metaphorical shoebox and sent everything in once a year to empty their account. We hated them. Dozens or hundreds of line items totaling thousands of dollars. Just because you only have $500 in your health savings account doesn't mean we get to stop there. If you sent in $4,000 in receipts, I had to account for it all. It totally affected your numbers for the day, and they tracked claims per hour religiously. The main issue was double-checking that everything added up right when you were done entering it. At 4 items a page, it took forever to tally. So I made an Excel sheet. It was laid out so I could enter every single line, then run a macro that would calculate the needed totals and dump all the text to a file formatted exactly so I could select 4 items at a time and paste them directly into the terminal window from the default starting cursor position, and every field would fill in automatically. Copy, paste, next, copy, paste, next, etc. It easily halved my entry times with much less work. Finding any typos was much easier. I just had to look at one column organized sheet instead of scrolling through many pages of terminal text. It was great. I showed it to my manager so the rest of my team could use it. She was horrified I would use something like that, as no human was double-checking as they went along. Despite demonstrable improvements to my error rates on large claims after I started using it, she ordered me to stop using it and forbid anyone on her team from automating any part of their job. I kept using it for the 2 months I stayed there after that. I had some of the highest claims per hour numbers and lowest error rates on her team. I never developed any more tools for them. Story 7. I used to have to make 2 contracts for every person I brought on a traveling training team. I said 2 contracts were unnecessary and made them into one, sent it to our lawyers, and they approved it. It still took me too long to update each contract with different names, pay rates, and dates. I went on Reddit Excel and found out how to make a mailer list, and hours of work now take me 10 minutes. I didn't tell anyone this, though, so I just take my time. Then I had to make floor maps for restaurants to send to the company that puts them into our scheduling program. All of our restaurants are cookie cutter, so I just use Paint to piece them together rather than make all of them each time. I'm like Picasso with Microsoft Paint. Then they wanted me to use Excel to keep track of training teams. One of my coworkers used Smartsheet and loves to teach people things. So I joined Smartsheet with her, and she showed me around. It's way easier and easier to publish so that people can see the teams but not mess up any info. Using forms to avoid having to ask them 30 questions that auto-populate my Smartsheet. Sharing it with payroll so they never have to reach out to me. Templates on Outlook, tons of stuff. I basically took a lot of my job, thought there has to be an easier way, asked on Reddit or just Googled things, and spent maybe an hour learning something that will save me many hours in the future. I always tell people to just Google things. They say, I don't know what to Google. And I say, whatever your problem is, just Google it the exact same way you'd say it to me. Then when they Google Excel thing that makes this do that, they are shocked that they find their answer. Story 8. Worked as a cashier during the holiday season back when I was 16. The supermarket was selling drinks by the boxes, and at that time we only had barcode scanners at the front of the computer. No handheld scanners existed. I was lazy and didn't want to carry boxes up to the scanner, so I politely asked my customers if I could cut out the barcode from their box to scan and keep. Some agreed and some didn't, but eventually I managed to collect all the barcodes needed. I labeled them and kept them in a file for easy reference. Apparently, another cashier got envious of my smart move and complained to the chief cashier, who promptly lectured me on how it's dangerous for me to scan such barcodes as I might scan the wrong things. She told me to throw it all away and carry the boxes as I was meant to. I mean, I was young, so I could, but the other cashiers were older, and some were elderly and needed the customers themselves to help carry the boxes to the scanner. But whatever, I guess jealousy trumps common sense. Story 9. I work in a semi-warehouse environment, and we have to track where items are at all times. When we move an item from location A to location B, we have to type out the to and from locations. We do this hundreds of times a shift. I went online to a free barcode maker website and spent about 20 minutes making location barcodes. I save hours a day by scanning barcodes. Story 10. A long time ago, I was sent to help a team that was designing some analog test equipment. The big problem was when 2 of the parts were at different temperatures, the calibration would go off. They wanted me to design a circuit to measure the temperatures of the 2 parts and apply a correction. I solved the problem by putting both parts on the same heatsink so they would be at the same temperature. It worked. Story 11. I used to deliver beer. I did not like delivering beer. I may have ended up with 30 stops in a day, including deliveries that the customer would call in to our office for. I used to bring extra beer and blank invoices with me on the truck to prevent having to drive back to my warehouse to deliver 1 keg to a place that I was currently across the street from. 7 years later, the driver of that route is still doing that. Story 12. Herding yaks with a drone takes the cake for me. They run from it and oddly fear it, which is surprising considering they have literally 0 aerial predators. We only did it a few times because it really makes them uneasy and doesn't suit them well. But it is very effective and easy, and you can herd them from over half a mile away from inside the house. Edit. I'm really surprised how much this blew up. I've never had so many post replies, but I'll try to get around to answering as many questions as possible. My post history is predominantly about yak and tower climbing stuff, so I'd suggest going there if you're curious. Story 13. At my last job, a truck suspension shop, we did inventory every December, and it was someone's job to count all the washers and screws of every size. It was my first inventory, and I casually mentioned that they should just weigh one screw or washer, then weigh them all and divide the weight to get the count. Everyone looked at me like I had given them the key to the universe. Counting washers and screws went from a day or two to just a few hours. Story 14. A few years ago, my mom was tasked with fixing my grandparents' toilet while we were visiting for the holidays. The toilet reservoir was constantly filling and running, thus flooding the bathroom because the buoy arm wasn't lifting high enough from the water in the reservoir to switch off the water flow. My mom, who is normally a very practical person, had been tackling the issue for hours. She was quite distraught, thinking we would have to order a new buoy arm, maybe even a new sensor or switch, and pull the whole assembly apart to replace everything. She was planning a trip to Lowe's and pricing things out when I walked in. I took one look at it and bent the metal arm the buoy was attached to down, so the arm had a slight upwards curve. The buoy still reached the same level in the reservoir but registered on the sensor as higher because of the curve in the arm. Problem solved. Rangers lead the way. I watched it dawn on her what I had done, and she just looked at me like I had a third eye and said, "You little genius. I've been getting my efforts stymied by this thing for 4 hours, and you fixed it in 4 seconds." She was very happy I saved her from more work and spending more money. She calls me her little toilet engineer from time to time. I work on aircraft. It's mildly demeaning. And now my most upvoted comment is about a toilet I fixed once. Perfect. Story 15. In high school, we had to do 4 book reports every year. A friend of mine did his on each of the Lord of the Rings books and the Hobbit freshman year and turned in the same 4 book reports for the rest of his time in high school. You switched English teachers every year, so no one ever caught on. I was never brave enough to try the same thing. Story 16. I was working at a children's chess summer camp with this guy who consumed marijuana like you wouldn't believe, though he was still a far better chess player than me. One day, the kids were being particularly rambunctious, and I told him he had to take them outside to get their energy out. He had them spend the next hour doing American Ninja Warrior on the jungle gym and playground. I hadn't even heard of the show, but it was a group of young boys aged 6 to 12, so they all adored it. This coworker loved to get very high and watch the show. I don't know if he was under the influence at the camp, but he just sat on a bench and told the kids their time was getting slower when they did stunts, and they just scurried and jumped around faster. Story 17. Night auditor here. I had a meeting group arriving in the morning, about 130 people, and each person was going to pay their part. For every person, I needed to insert 4 items: food, beverage, room, etc. Each item had its price, and it needed to be inserted individually, and in order due to software limitations, it needed to be ABCD, 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 and so on 130 times, 4 times each individually. So, I spent 20 minutes setting up a mouse macro program and set it up to run 130 times. Luckily for me, I had 2 computers and was able to do my work on one while the other was busy for almost 2 hours. Story 18. Automated 70% of my job in a large finance firm as an intern. Never disclosed it and got paid easy money for 6 months. I spent the time doing courses and applying for my graduate school. Got my admission letter during the final 2 weeks of my internship and never looked back. Pro tip: Python and Excel can be your best friends. Obligatory edit. I went to sleep, and this thread blew up. Thank you for your stories, questions, and comments. I'm trying to get to as many as possible. Story 19. I had an Excel order form in my last job that required us to enter all hardware items from all suppliers by hand. I had to completely rewrite the existing script that pulled the hardware for the one supplier it worked on. It went from being a time-consuming, mistake-prone job to clicking a button on the order form, doing everything, and taking maybe 2 seconds for a huge job. Figuring out dynamic named ranges and getting them to work with drop-down boxes was also great. No more manually updating named ranges and drop-down boxes when new items were added. I also added conditional formatting everywhere to let the user know if there was an incomplete section on the form. No more rework when the next person down the line sent the form back to us incomplete. The thing I was really happy with was being able to cut the length of that script down by about 65% from what it originally was.